We are enjoying the fall landscape here in Wisconsin. It's just beautiful. I think it's a perfect time to connect with the healing atmosphere and the trees and the plants around us. The fall is one of my favorite times of year. Even though my songbirds have left, we're surrounded by trees where the leaves have turned to the reds and the golds. Those are usually the hard oak trees that give us those beautiful colors. I saw 10 to 12 turkeys the other day, Friday it was, coming home not too far from our house, and they were picking a little bit off the side of the road. So usually I don't see them there. Usually I see them around the golf course, but there they were. We should connect to nature more than we do sometimes when we go walking or hiking. It's wonderful to observe this wonderful natural world of ours. I'd like to just recite one little poem. When my children and I lived in Hawaii, the children were taught haiku, which is a Japanese form of poetry. And it is 17 symbols. There's three syllables, I should say, not symbols, 3 syllables in the first line, 5 in the second, 5 in the first, 7 in the second, and 5 in the third. And I came across this poem the other day. I like to read the haiku because it's so pretty. The Japanese poem is usually traditionally used to evoke images of the natural world. And this is one, it was by Julie Edmonds. I don't know who she is, but here goes. Softly falls the light of autumn's mellowing sun across fields and hills. And I think that's so pretty. We understand that California, Verizon has instituted the 5G in some cities out there, which is pretty bad. We really need to take back our clean and beautiful environment. We need to clean it up. We all should be planting the trees and the plants. You know, there's many out there who want to destroy our earth. And our children, our grandchildren are going to be susceptible to so much out there. There's all the chemtrails, and they seem like they're getting more here in Wisconsin. Sometimes the sky is absolutely filled with chemtrails, let alone everything else we've got going around here. And Bob, do you want to inject here?
Well, say a little bit more about that 5G.
Well, that's all.
What company was it?
Verizon.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? I don't know if anybody's been watching TV recently, but Verizon has a new commercial which I thought was kind of interesting. And they're advertising that they are the leader of the pack when it comes to putting up G5, and they are putting G5 everywhere, and they're starting with 3 major cities that they're putting the G5 in, and their advertisement says, quote unquote, we're turning these cities into smart cities. And that's the line they use for their sales pitch. Well, you know how the government works. Every time they say something, they really mean the opposite. In other words, when they say they're going to be smart cities, what they're actually doing is dumbing down the people. They're using the technology to control people's minds, and they're actually going to become dumb cities rather than smart cities. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Go ahead, dear.
Yeah. They're just, I know it's LA for one, wasn't San Diego the other, and Sacramento. Yeah, they're well, Houston was another, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Boy, it's like they're on a roll here. Hopefully they'll leave some of our cities alone for now. Is it I don't know if it's just an experiment or they're going to just keep going.
We're gonna keep going.
Keep going. Wow, that's awful. Have you guys noticed any difference? You're around LA, aren't you? In
They're going to
Huntington?
keep going. They're going to keep going until a couple of them get hung. Then they'll start looking at a different solution.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to continue today. I know I have experiences with reptilians, and I had a couple more. And it usually occurs right when I'm doing the new UU. And in the first encounter, Rebisar was beside me. And as I'm doing the new UU, I'm all of a sudden looking at, with Rebisar, he looked, the best I can describe would be a Yoda character, only he was a lot bigger, and he had long bunches of gray tufted hair coming out of the sides of his head, and his top of his scalp was bald. His skin looked sort of like Yoda's, only the color anyway. Maybe if you added a dash more of gray and yellow, and maybe snake characteristics thrown in. He was not too pleasant looking. And in that scene, I had actually just looked at him, and he was just there. The next time I did the new UU, the scene opened, and there was a group of what appeared to be of reptilian thugs. They were ugly, they were menacing, but Rebisar was standing behind them, so I knew I was okay. But oh my goodness, they looked about as nasty as you could encounter. Now this third encounter happened, and it's by far the most pleasant. And again, it was while I was doing the new UU. I suddenly found myself in a huge, opulent room that was sparsely decorated. Even though the floors, they were metallic gold, and some of the furnishings were gold. It had a red velvet davenport in French provincial design along the back wall by a window, and there were 2 velvet chairs. Now, the room was absolutely humongous, bigger than I can even describe, and ceilings maybe 30 or 40 feet high. Anyway, the reptile himself was about 7 foot or so tall. I'm just guessing here. He had on a long coat. It was an A-line shape that went to the floor. The coat was like a maroon color, and it was made out of stiff material. It had a huge Elizabethan collar, and that Elizabethan collar had vertical black and white stripes going down. It was also made of this same stiff material. The funny part is he was about as handsome as reptiles go. And if you're going to put him in a movie, he'd have been a movie star. That's how good looking he was in the reptile sense. He politely had asked me if I would like a tour of his house. And I said, sure. Anyway, he turned and he walked towards a huge door that opened, huge wooden door. This reptile, or what appeared to be a reptile, had long strides, purposeful strides. He walked fast. He said, come on to me. And I had a little bit of a hard time keeping up with him because of his long strides and the tempo that he walked with. But then I was out of the experience, and I sometimes wonder, if it was one of the real guides or if it was really a good-looking reptile. I'm sure they have them, just haven't seen a lot of them. I want to talk about a thing that happened to me one morning. I'm sleeping, and I wake up in my astral body, and I have a pill in my mouth. Now, I had open heart surgery about 4 years ago, and they gave me a medication to take. Okay, so I take it the night before, but I wake up in the astral body, and that pill is still in my mouth. And I thought, yikes, I'm not taking that again. But anyway, it just goes to show you that the things you do on the physical or the things you eat or drink affect or take all of the bodies besides the physical. Sometimes we think that it's only the physical body that is affected by what you consume, but it's not. It's all of them. And I remember Millie Moore, who was a person in the corporation. I'm sure the old corporation people know her. Said to me once, she said, cancer comes from the astral plane. And I said, it does? And she said, yes, it does. And I just left it there until I heard about the tap lining that the corporation does on people, that Harry does with Joni behind him, crony Joni behind him. And I thought, now it makes sense, what she had told me. So you're on.
Well, I had a comment about the reptilians. Sandy, you touched on she's seeing more and more reptilians on the astral and having experiences. She's seeing the good-looking ones, the hideous ones, and there's all sorts of them. And I was just wondering, how many people listening have ever read David Ickes' books? Particularly, he wrote a book called The Biggest Secret. Well, anyway, if you haven't read The Biggest Secret, I would highly recommend it to everybody to get a copy of it and read it. And in that book, David Icke exposes the blue bloods of Europe, how they are mostly reptilians, and the higher ones up in the hierarchy, like the queens and kings, are capable of shape-shifting from the reptilian form to human form and back again. And David Icke goes on to explain how for example, the Queen of England, and since he wrote a book about it, I will say that he exposed and has numerous witnesses of the Queen of England shape-shifting into a hideous reptilian about 9 feet tall, where she would eat human flesh during these rituals of theirs. And that's a common thing that these reptilians do, is they have these rituals of eating human beings. And we all know from Dwayne and other readings that the reptilians, they created the human beings to be food for them, as well as slaves to do servile work. Well, anyway, once you become familiar that a lot of our government leaders and especially the religious leaders are very reptilian, I wanted to say something that I found interesting this week, and that is, how many people listening have ever watched the movie with Charlton Heston called The 10 Commandments? Anybody ever watch that movie where Charlton Heston, the Pharaoh kicks him out of Egypt and he wanders around in the wilderness, and then he goes up on the mountain of God and Mount Sinai and talks to God? Anybody remember that movie? Anybody listening remember that?
Yeah.
Well, let me put an interesting perspective on it. In the movie, they never showed the God that he talked to, but they did show the after effects when Joshua was sitting there at the bottom of the mountain and Charlton Heston as Moses came down after talking with God. He looked like he aged about 100 years. His hair went straight out. It was all white, and he walked like a zombie. He just walked straight ahead. He didn't look left or right. His eyes were unfocused, and he was just walking straight ahead with his cane, like he was zoned out. Well, they don't tell you that in the movie, but if you went up to meet with the God that your ancestors like Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob had been worshiping for generations and generations, and you had your chance to meet with God, and you get up there on that mountainside, and all of a sudden you come across a 9-foot tall, ugly reptilian who claims to be your God, and that would just as soon as eat you as look at you, you'd probably age 100 years and turn into a zombie and just be zoned out, just like Charlton Heston was in that movie. So I think that's what really happened. And when Moses was up on that mountainside, the reptilians told him that we will get your people out of the bondage of the Egyptians, but in order for us to do that for you, you are going to have to set up a system of sacrifices where you're going to have to take your best cattle and sheep and everything else that you have, and we're going to set up a system of sacrifices where you take these animals and you have rituals where you sacrifice these animals for us. And we're the ones that are going to be benefiting from your sacrifices. We're going to be drinking the blood and eating the flesh of these animals that you sacrifice. And that, I think that's what that whole story up on the mountainside was all about, meeting the reptilians. And the reptilians told Moses that, you know, we're going to allow you to do animal sacrifices, so we will eat your animals instead of eating you. And then when Moses went back into Egypt and talked to Pharaoh to let my people go, one of the big plagues was to turn all the water to blood, as a reminder that if the Hebrews under Moses didn't shape up and do what they wanted, they were all going to be killed, and they were going to be the blood sacrifice. And that was one of the reasons why they put the blood on the door sills in everybody's home, so the firstborn wouldn't become a victim of the reptilians. And I think that's the real story, although they've twisted around to make it look like the blood was a savior, you know, from the evil of their some other source. I don't know what, but I think the truth of the story is all for the reptilians to come up with a system that helps the Hebrews if they would do the animal sacrifices. And then later on, they use that same system to say that they would have a savior like Jesus who would save mankind from their sins. But we know, you know, what good does it do to save somebody from their sins when they go to heaven, live out a period of time, and the Lord's of Karma send them back to be reincarnated? They never die, so what do you need to be saved from if you never die? You don't need a savior. So it's just kind of an interesting perspective I thought I'd throw out there for everybody.